Okay, we're back after a couple months of busyness. I'd say a break from videos, but not a break from everything else. So glad to be back to continue reading through the biography I wrote of Dr. Gordon H. Clark. And we are now up to chapter 8, the continued controversy and its results. And I've been thinking really throughout this series that it's somewhat unfortunate I didn't record videos and comments earlier on this because I've started to forget some things. But as I read, if I do remember something that's not mentioned in the book, I'll try to um, mention something about it, say something about it. So we are into really the meat of the book now as we continue in the controversy and see its results. I mean, a sad episode in American Presbyterian history, but a very valuable one. And I see a lot of Presbyterian history through this controversy, and perhaps I'm being myopic or something like this, but I do think it is a valuable controversy and a valuable um, set of issues to think through. To me, it's quite clear that Gordon Clark was right on these, and I continue to be amazed by the number of people who hold to Van Til's views, although his views seem to have fallen in popularity. And maybe today, not that many pastors in Presbyterian churches read or follow either Clark or Van Til. Um, uh, who knows what they're reading or what they're following? But well, we of course hope the scriptures. Let's start then with chapter 8. I'm going to skip, I think, this epigram and start right in the text. Though the complaint was defeated at the Philadelphia Presbytery on March 29, 1945, it was reintroduced at the OPC's 12th General Assembly in May of the same year. To address the complaint, a committee of 5 was formed at the General Assembly. These members, by rules of the church, were required to come from outside of the Philadelphia Presbytery, the presbytery from which the complaint had arisen. The 5 elected to the committee were Richard Weiler Gray, Edmund Clowney, Lawrence Gilmore, Burton Goddard, and John Murray. Now, here's one of a number of typos or misprints in my book. I then say Dr. Murray. It's actually Mr. Murray. John Murray did not have his doctorate, I understand. So, Mr. Murray, a professor at WTS, was sure to favor the views of the complainants. Dr. Goddard of Gordon College and Reverend Gray were close friends of Clark and were doubtless on his side. Thus, the deciding opinions would be those of Reverend Gilmore, a minister of a church in New Jersey, and Reverend Clowney, a former Clark student at Wheaton College and recent graduate of Westminster Theological Seminary. Clowney was elected as the chair of the committee, and his involvement would be crucial. In preparing to write the report to be presented at the following year's General Assembly, Clowney wrote to Clark to clarify his understanding of Clark's views. Although Clowney's original letter is not extant, Clark's response is. Clark's letter shows his disgust with the whole situation. It is worthy of quoting at length. It reads in part. It is always a pleasure to reply personally to a personal letter that asks for my views. The committee of which you are a member has not asked me to appear. I argued at the last assembly that the procedure set up was in fact an administrative procedure applied to a judicial case, and that the injustice of it is no less than that heaped on Dr. Machen in his trial. I could ask for no better persons as judges, but the present committee is not judicial. So much for the record. Regarding one of the theological questions on which Clowney requested clarification, Clark's response brought out what he saw as the key fault in the view of the complainants, the introduction of the term content to the object mode distinction of knowledge to which he held. Clark wrote, the mode of knowing, as I use the word, is simply the psychological activity of the knower. The object is what the knower knows. An answer to the question, how do you know, would state the mode of your knowing. An answer to the question, what do you know, would state the object. And so far, throughout all the discussion, I have failed to see any reason for introducing any other element. In particular, the third element, content, that has been introduced is simply unintelligible to me. At the 13th General Assembly of the OPC in May of 1946, the Committee of Five, with the exception of John Murray, brought their conclusions in Clarke's favor. More precisely, they concluded that the presbytery had not erred in ordaining Clarke. Edmund Clowney presented the report, which concluded that Clarke's view on the incomprehensibility of God did not substantially differ from the view of the complainants. Their majority report read in part, "It has been shown that the major specific charge of the complaint cannot be supported from the stenographic record. Dr. Clarke cannot be accused of failing to distinguish between divine and human knowledge as to content when he analyzes knowledge into only two parts, mode and object. We have seen that it is possible, and even likely, that Dr. Clarke's distinction of the mode of knowledge includes much of what the complainants require in their distinction of content. This question must be examined somewhat more closely. To declare that the mode, content, object schematization of knowledge cannot be insisted upon is not to declare that no doctrine conveyed in such a schematization can be insisted upon. The difficulty emerges in determining just what difference the complainants are insisting upon in speaking of content, a term which they do not define." That's the end of the majority report. Quote, referring to the complaint as it relates to the Westminster Confession, the report concluded, "Our committee is of the opinion that the complaint requires the Presbytery of Philadelphia to exact a more specialized theory of knowledge than our standards demand." Following the General Assembly's report in Clarke's favor, Clarke analyzed the complaint and the answer in a document he titled Studies of the Doctrine of the Complaint. And I probably should have noted here in the book that I've included that as an appendix. So it's the first time that has been published, something I found in the archives in Clarke's papers. So that's a valuable document. It's not my writing on the complaint, but it's in fact Dr. Clarke's from the time period. Came out in the winter of 1946-47. In this document, never published but found among Clarke's papers, he aimed to show that the source of the difficulty and the chief issue between the two parties is epistemological. He explained, "The men who wrote the answer maintain the position of Warfield, Hodge, Carnock, and Calvin. That the complaint does not consistently hold this position, but that it alters and vitiates the doctrine by an untenable epistemology. It is the aim of this paper to prove." His full argument is too lengthy to include here, but it is worth reading and therefore has been included as an appendix to this volume. After the Clarke case was officially resolved in Clarke's favor, the faculty of Westminster Theological Seminary turned their attention to those who had supported Clarke. Clarke's supporters became targets in the WTS's faction's attempt to purify the church towards their view of Reformed theology by setting up roadblocks to their influence. Three situations where the Clarke case spilled over into other church-related business were: 1, the attempt to found a Reformed Christian university; 2, the ordination of Alan Tickner; and 3, the decision not to renew the professorship of the missionary Floyd Hamilton at the Korean seminary. So first we'll look at the Christian University Association. In the early 1940s, a movement began among members of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church to found a Christian university. The denomination already had a seminary, although officially an independent one in Westminster Theological Seminary, for the theological education of their prospective pastors. But the desire arose to have also an institution for the education of students pursuing graduate degrees in other areas of study. At that time, many of the church leaders of the OPC believed that the nation's universities were antithetical to Christianity. In fact, these universities, it was argued, ultimately based their teaching on secular principles. According to one editor of the Presbyterian Guardian, there was not a single graduate school which based its instruction upon the Protestant Christian life and worldview. The Christian University Association was formed to bring the idea of a thoroughly Christian university to fruition. Edwin H. Ryan was elected as General Secretary of the Committee of the Association. Led by Ryan, who was the primary fundraiser, the association called for a great center of Christian learning and offered the Free University in Amsterdam as an exemplar of such an institution. According to the association's adopted constitution, the new university was to be committed to reform doctrine but free of denominational control. Membership in the association came from across the Reformed and Presbyterian denominations in North America. Included were members of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, the Christian Reformed Church, the Reformed Presbyterian Church General Synod, the Presbyterian Church in the United States, the Reformed Church in America, and the Presbyterian Church in Canada. The association was truly a pan-reformed venture, at least at its beginning. In 1942, Gordon Clark was contemplating resignation from Wheaton College and began searching for a professor position elsewhere. At this time, he received a letter from Ryan about the new university project. Ryan wrote to Clark, "You will be delighted to know that 4 denominations have appointed committees to confer about a federation of Presbyterian and Reformed churches. If this federation becomes a reality, we can establish a university association, separate from the federation but encouraged by all the groups in it. If our plans go forward as I hope, we might be able to have as large a number as 300,000 who would get in back of this university. It very likely will be several years before we can start." Ryan knew of Clark's impact on Wheaton's students, and he saw Clark as an important constituent for the new university to reach the broader evangelical world. Clark agreed with Ryan regarding the need to found a Christian university. He wrote in the Presbyterian Guardian, "Practically everything that appears in print is in the broad sense humanistic. Such a situation shows clearly what is needed. A center of Christian learning must be established in which investigation in all fields of study will be pursued. A Christian college is not sufficient. Several colleges exist at the present time. Some do respectable work, some are rather incompetent. A list of the faculty's publications is the criterion, and there is enough room in the country for other Christian colleges if they are to be competent. But the greater need is the need of a university. This includes a law school. It must include a graduate school for the granting of the doctorate, and it must be administered by a faculty which, through research, mutual criticism, and publication, will develop the philosophy to coordinate Christian thought and action." There can be little doubt that Clark, with his many publications and proven dissatisfaction with the interdenominational atmosphere of Wheaton College, envisioned himself as part of this proposed faculty. Other church leaders also saw Clark as the right hire. Robert K. Rudolph of the Reformed Episcopal Seminary wrote of the board of the Christian University Association, "We had begun to try to choose an opening faculty. Many of us deemed Gordon Clark the right man to head the philosophy department." The association took an important step toward their goal of founding the new university when in 1944 they purchased 34 acres along with Linwood Hall at the PAB Widener Estate in Elkins Park, Philadelphia, for their campus. The plan for the Christian University was as grandiose as the 110-room neoclassical revival mansion that was Linwood Hall. The university was to be second to none and grant both undergraduate and graduate degrees. The association placed a 4-page article in the Presbyterian Guardian with pictures of the newly purchased campus and an advertisement seeking contributions and applications for membership. The article also listed the trustees of the association. Among them were John Murray and Cornelius Van Til of Westminster Theological Seminary, as well as Edwin Ryan and Robert K. Rudolph. but the list of trustees did not include Gordon Clark. A contest in 1946 to determine the name for the university produced as the winning entry the Christian University of America. But this would prove to be the last positive development for the ill-fated venture. The formation of the university progressed far more slowly than Edwin Ryan desired. Two factions arose within the association. The majority of the association's board of trustees was controlled by men, including a number of Westminster Theological Seminary professors, Ned Stonehouse, John Murray, R.B. Kuiper, and Cornelius Van Til, who wanted the association's membership limited to those who shared their own view of Reformed theology. A second group, led by Ryan, argued for a broader appeal. These two groups broke down along the same lines as the ongoing controversy over Clark's ordination. Dr. Rudolph, a longtime friend of Clark, charged the majority on the board with the responsibility for the problems then present in the association. He said the majority had certain convictions concerning the nature of Calvinism and concerning theology and apologetics, which in fact commit the association to a position that will make the founding of a university impossible, and that, in particular, the board should ease its requirements for candidates for future membership on the board, if the work committed to the board was to be performed. For Dr. Rudolph, it was clear that the two factions arose along the same lines and for many of the same reasons that they did in the dispute regarding Gordon Clark's ordination. He believed people were nominated for the board who were against Dr. Clark, and apparently only such people had a chance of being nominated. To evidence his point, at one of the early meetings of the association, Clark's name was proposed as a possible board member and was immediately rejected by the majority. Ryan, too, was at odds with the board of trustees. According to Dr. Rudolph, the board accused Ryan of not being Calvinistic enough, an accusation that Rudolph believed arose because Ryan had supported Clark in the ordination controversy. Lack of sufficient membership and support from other denominations affected the finances of the association. The Christian Reformed Church concluded in its synod minutes that because unfortunately there are indications of internal dissension even at this early date within the ranks of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, whose leaders are the chief proponents of the Calvinistic University, witness the Clark case, Synod declares that we must therefore be hesitant in lending support to the establishment of a so-called Calvinistic university when the leaders of this movement are not thoroughly agreed among themselves as to what constitutes true Calvinism. Payments were due on the property, but because of the lack of support, the association struggled to pay them. On September 11, 1946, the association's board terminated the services of Edwin Ryan by an 18-5 vote. The reason given by Ned Stonehouse for Ryan's dismissal was that, over a period of time, it became increasingly evident that Dr. Ryan was out of accord with certain policies of the Board of Trustees, policies which deeply affected the character of the movement and the university which it seeks to establish and maintain. Evidences provided for this accusation were that Ryan thought the Board of Trustees was failing to carry out its responsibilities by being too selective with board membership, and that relative to the Board of Trustees, Ryan had a differing conception of the constitution of the association, believing it gave him, as president, power over the board, even to remove members from it. Thus it was, as in the Clark case, a power struggle. But this time, the struggle was for control of the university association instead of the denomination or seminary. The connection between Ryan's dismissal and the complaint against Clark is evidenced by a comment from Thomas Birch, editor of the pro-WTS Presbyterian Guardian. For Birch and those in the WTS faction, only their own views, which in many ways originated in the traditions of the Dutch Reformed churches in both America and the Netherlands, were acceptable in the denomination. Birch wrote, "The Christian Reformed Church has no militant left wing of the type seeking domination of the OPC. It has no Clarkian theology, no devotees of piosity. It's a new word. No diluters or soft peddlers of its Calvinism. I am not overly fond of the Christian Reformed Church, but I'd prefer it any day to what the OPC will be if the Clark Strong Ryan wing ever, God forbid, gains control. Unquote. In the same letter, Birch wrote, "A man whose attitude is unfriendly toward Westminster Seminary is a man whose true zeal for the principles and furtherance of Calvinism I must gravely question." That goes whether the man's name is Erdmans, Strong, Ryan, Clark, or Plotnick. On the opposing side of the issue, the view of the Clark, Strong, Ryan wing, and the general dissatisfaction with the leadership of the association, are seen in a comment from one member of the board, John MacDonald, who wrote, "That the university project should have come to this point at all is a shame and surely cannot be pleasing to God. The reason for this condition seems to me to be an entirely unchristian attitude on the part of such members of the board who have insisted that their brand of Calvinism is the only acceptable form for the university." Criticism of Ryan's forced resignation came to Stonehouse in a letter from Reverend Robert Moody Holmes that read as follows, fairly lengthy quote. "Years ago, Dr. Ryan was vitally interested in establishing a Christian university. He talked with me about it as well as others. And just when he was about to see his dream come true, after years of untiring labor to that end, you ruthlessly cut the ground from under him and destroyed the work to which he had given his life. You knew from the beginning that his policy was ecumenical. On what other basis could the university serve the Reformed faith? That was its only excuse for being. Why then did you associate yourselves with him and the movement if you disagreed with that principle? It looks like usurpation from one angle and sabotage from another. Are you and your colleagues bent on eliminating everyone in the Reformed family who does not fit your own peculiar personality pattern? You are destroying, whether you realize it or not, the noble and much needed work of Westminster Seminary, the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, and the Christian University Association." End quote. In the wake of Ryan's dismissal, Dr. Rudolph resigned from the board. In his resignation letter, Rudolph explained the reasons for resigning, saying this: "An increasing understanding that the leadership of the majority is incapable of running a university with the many minds that would have to compose its sincere and Calvinistic trustees and faculty, when that leadership has taken part in seeking to bring heresy charges against such a staunch and well-known Calvinist and believer in the Westminster Confession as Gordon H. Clark, Ph.D. Dr. Clark has been falsely accused of disloyalty to the Reformed faith because the leadership of the majority charged him with their own understanding of the implications of his theological and epistemological positions, not because of proven denials or disloyalty to any provision of the Westminster Confession. Who in faculty or on trustees would be safe from such persecution?" End quote. The infighting in the OPC surrounded the question of subscription to the Westminster Confession of Faith. The WTS faction believed they were continuing the tradition of old school Presbyterianism in requiring subscription to the standards. The opposition, however, equally desirous of maintaining the confession, felt that the WTS faction was going beyond the confession in making their own peculiar or particular views the standard. One complaint to Ned Stonehouse of the actions of the board against Edwin Ryan saw the action as a continuance of the Clark case, and even referred to Gordon Clark as that persecuted saint. Not all spoke so favorably of Clark, however. One donor to the project wrote to Ned Stonehouse, quote, "I've been reading the letter that was sent to me a short time ago about the discontent of several members of the University Association, living more or less in the near neighborhood of the university property, except a few of them, like Dr. Gordon H. Clark and Cum Sway," that is Latin, I guess, for his group or those that are like him. I have read the missive more than once to get a clear understanding of the matter. It seems to me there is an element in the association that is not sound to the core in regard to Calvinism. And now they see that those who are stronger Calvinists than they are may get the upper hand in regard to the university control. They rather wreck the affair than go along with them for future support. Following Ryan's departure, that was end quote. Following Ryan's departure, a conspicuous anomaly was noticed in the books of the association. Stonehouse wrote to Ryan, in connection with the sale of the Widener estate, it has developed that there are persons enrolled as members who were quite unaware they were members. In checking over the applications, it further develops that these people never personally subscribed the application for membership, but their names were typed in by another person. In view of the very clear provisions of the Constitution of the Christian University Association concerning applications for membership, I am greatly interested to learn if there is anything that you can say in extenuation of this procedure. Unquote. Further inquiry into Ryan's mailings to members who had paid more than their required $5 fee found that Ryan was allowing each additional $5 to be used to sign up additional members. Shortly after problems in the bookkeeping were discovered, Ryan announced that he was returning to the PCUSA 10 years after originally breaking away from them to join the OPC. As Ryan had been the right-hand man of J. Gresham Machen, the late leader of the OPC, Ryan's return to the PCUSA was an embarrassment to the denomination. As evidenced by the failure of the Christian University Association, the unity of the OPC and of Westminster Theological Seminary had fallen apart since Machen's death. Machen was the linchpin in both organizations. In his day, there had been a common enemy, modernism, and the many differences among the fundamentalists who formed the OPC and WTS were set aside. The new factions which developed came as a result of the leadership void produced by Machen's absence. The Christian University Association lasted only a short time after Ryan's departure. The association defaulted on its loans for the campus property. The campus was sold at a sheriff's sale to a real estate developer in 1948, who had thoughts of turning it into a country club. The property finally realized its academic destiny in 1952 when Faith Theological Seminary purchased it for their new campus. In 1945, Clark had no way of knowing that the Christian University of America was a doomed endeavor, and he expected to only stay at his new post at Butler for a few years until the Christian University could be established. With connections on the board and the desire to find a teaching position at a Christian university, Clark was a likely candidate, despite some board's members' poor opinion of his theology, for a position as professor of philosophy at the university, if it should develop. Interest in the proposed university among the Westminster faculty, however, was never more than lukewarm, since there was insufficient donor money available for both the seminary, which itself was not on a sure financial footing, and a university. Edwin Ryan's expectations for the Christian university were wildly optimistic. His expectation of 300,000 backers for the university never materialized. This figure itself seems to be just his summation of the entire membership of the denominations involved, not any study of actual interest among the members. Considering the lack of agreement, even within the relatively small OPC, the idea that all the Reformed Christian denominations could cooperate on a project as massive as the university seems ludicrous in hindsight. So that's the first here in the chapter of things that are sort of the wake of the Clark controversy or involved in it. And then we will go into some cases here of other ministers seeking ordination and trouble that arose for those. First is the Tickner case. The battle over Clark's ordination negatively impacted another ordination in the OPC, that of Charles Allen Tickner. Tickner was well acquainted with the issues being debated in the church. He had been one of Clark's students at Wheaton College and graduated from there in 1938. He then attended Westminster, where he earned his master's in theology in 1941, and later became an assistant for the Old Testament professor E.J. Young from 1943 to 1945. As a licentiate, Tickner supplied the pulpit of Westminster Church in Bend, Oregon, in the summer of 1944, and the next year was stated supply at Mediator Church in Philadelphia. Tickner supported Clark's ordination and was one of the 5 men in the Philadelphia Presbytery who collaborated to write the answer in Clark's defense. That Tickner supported Clark is also shown in the Presbyterian Guardian, which recorded this. Mr. Tickner, speaking against the motion, said that Dr. Clark's abilities exceeded those of many Orthodox Presbyterian church ministers, that he was not ignorant of Hebrew, that he had taught the Reformed faith at Wheaton College, and had been zealous in spreading Reformed truth in countless ways. Mr. Tickner added that his own interest in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church would be dulled, if not killed, if Dr. Clark were lost to the movement. Tickner sought ordination in the OPC himself in 1946 and found resistance, just as Clark had. At his ordination, the Presbyterian Guardian noted that, quote, as he was one of 5 who presented to Presbytery a proposed answer to the complaint against the Presbytery in connection with the licensure and ordination of Dr. G.H. Clark, he was questioned at somewhat greater length than usual, but the Presbytery finally determined by majority vote to proceed with the ordination. The extent of the resistance to Tickner's ordination is not evident from the record, but testimony being passed around the church in 1948 and printed in the Presbyterian Guardian read as follows. There was a long and persistent effort in the Presbytery of Philadelphia and in the General Assembly to prevent and then bring into question the ordination of Dr. Gordon H. Clark. And during this past year, there was a similar determined opposition to the ordination of Mr. C. Allen Tickner, in spite of the fact that the previous General Assembly had upheld the Presbytery of Philadelphia in approving the theological examination of Dr. Clark, who had expressed essentially the same views. End quote. Robert Strong's lecture, The Gordon H. Clark Case, corroborates this story, recording this, quote, Allen Tickner had been a teacher at Westminster Theological Seminary. He was very nearly refused ordination because of supporting Clark's position. So there's the Tickner case, and then there's the Hamilton case. In 1947, the danger of sharing Clark's views became apparent once again when the Foreign Missions Committee of the OPC at the 14th General Assembly rejected the request of Floyd Hamilton, a longtime missionary in Korea, to return to Koryu Theological Seminary in Korea, where he had taught until World War II forced his retreat. They reported, the committee, on the basis of Mr. Hamilton's testimony before the committee and some recent publications of his, was not assured of the wisdom of sending Mr. Hamilton at the present time to teach in a theological seminary in Korea. Although the committee chose not to send Hamilton to teach at the seminary, they did not desire for him to continue, or they did desire for him to continue with general missionary service in Korea. Hamilton recognized that the committee's decision was directly related to his having sided with Clark in the controversy. Hamilton, upset at the actions, resigned from the committee and wrote, the committee obviously took such action because it felt I was doctrinally unsound, referring to the fact that he had sided with Clark's position in the controversy. Later, at the General Assembly, all the members of the Foreign Missions Committee who had chosen not to send Hamilton were themselves reelected. Hamilton and others viewed this as an approval by the majority of the denomination of the committee's decision not to send him. The battle in the church continued into the next year at the 15th General Assembly in 1948. Here, 3 notable actions were taken by the supporters of Clark and Hamilton. Firstly, Martin Bond, who was then Clark's pastor at Covenant OPC in Indianapolis, made an overture on behalf of the Presbytery of Ohio, asking for the signers of the complaint against Clark to present to the next year's General Assembly a, quote, statement acknowledging their errors of judgment and reprehensible defect of charity in circulating the aforementioned allegations, unquote. Bond's second overture, also on behalf of the Presbytery of Ohio, addressed Hamilton's situation, requesting to, quote, terminate the services of all present members, unquote, of multiple committees, including the Foreign Missions Committee, responsible for the refusal to send Floyd Hamilton to Korea to teach at the theological seminary. The moderator of the General Assembly, John Galbraith, ruled that these overtures were out of order because they, quote, contemplated judicial action which was not the prerogative of this assembly, unquote. A number of ministers, including Hamilton, requested that their negative votes be recorded. Hamilton was so upset that he requested permission to be excused for the remainder of the assembly. The third action taken by supporters of Clark was a protest lodged by 21 ministers and read by Richard Wyler Gray to the General Assembly for failing to pass an amendment that would have assured that the four doctrines of the Clark case not be considered as tests of theological soundness as they were extra confessional. Okay. Do I want to continue? I think we will cut it there. It's sort of a long chapter. Sometimes I like to go for an hour here, but I'm getting talked out. And we'll start next time here with Samuel Allen's 7 letters. Appreciate all of you who sit through such history as this. A few things going on here. We've got new patches now for our trail ministry. If you'd like one of these, let me know. Our SOLA ministry. We have hikers here coming off the Appalachian Trail. Keeping very busy. And always glad for volunteers. If you're interested in our ministry, let us know. Trying to also get back into some book writing, but it might be some years before they come out. My longest term goal of writing something on Clark's philosophy may be scuttled permanently, but I am trying to publish, probably self-publish, a collection of essays on Clark that I've written before. And then I'm trying to work on a devotional as well for hikers on the Appalachian Trail. And it seems like I had a third book I was working on. I should know what this is. But life gets very complicated, as I'm sure you all know. It's in your younger years, I think, when you're studying theology, maybe before you're married, you have lots of time to get in these online debates and study this stuff in depth. And then in your later years, you have more time to reflect, or less time to reflect maybe, but you have over many years, perhaps you can come to some good conclusions. But I can certainly see why so many capable artists and thinkers in various ways do their best work early in life. And so I hope it's still early in my life. I turned 40 recently, and hopefully can push out some more work that will stand the test of time. Certainly there is plenty of work to be done in Christian thought. There's just massive areas that are left unworked on, I guess is what I'm looking for. So God bless to all, and have a good day.